Let's talk about that device in your pocket. You know the one. We're going to dig into a pretty radical idea today. What if our technology isn't just something we use? What if it's becoming a literal extension of our minds?
I mean, think about it. Your day probably starts with something just like this. You're offloading a small mental task, not even giving it a second thought. It's just automatic. Or maybe you need to go somewhere new. You don't pull out a map, you don't try to remember the route, you just outsource that entire cognitive load to your phone.
And wow, has it gotten sophisticated. We're not just offloading reminders anymore, we're offloading complex creative tasks. And the thing is, this integration has become so seamless, so normal, you've probably barely even noticed it happening.
So, this brings us to the absolute core of the issue. When our reliance on these things is this deep, this integrated, where do we end and our devices begin? To really get our heads around that question, we need a way to think about it. And it actually comes from a fascinating idea in philosophy that might just change how you see the phone in your hand forever. It's called the extended mind thesis. And way back in 1998, two philosophers, Andy Clark and David Chalmers, basically said, look, if an object out in the world functions like a part of your brain, we should probably just consider it part of your mind. And they use a really simple thought experiment to make their case.
So, meet Inga and Otto. Inga wants to go to the museum, and she just uses her regular biological memory to remember the way. Otto has Alzheimer's, so he carries a notebook everywhere. When he needs the directions, he just opens it up. The killer argument from Clark and Chalmers was this: functionally, there's no difference. Because Otto's notebook is always there and he trusts it completely, it's not just a tool, it is his memory.
And this is where it stops being a quirky thought experiment and becomes, well, your life. That philosophical concept from the 90s is now a reality for billions of us. Your phone is Otto's notebook. It's always there, you trust it without question, and it holds your memories, your maps, your entire social world. Now, to see how deep this integration really goes, let's look at a classic model of how we think. You've probably heard of it from Daniel Kahneman. He talked about two systems. System 1 is that fast gut reaction thinking. System 2 is the slow, deliberate problem-solving part of our brain. Well, some researchers think our extended mind has added a totally new layer to this. They're calling it System 0. And this isn't just a tool like a notebook. This is an AI-driven layer that's constantly learning your habits, your preferences, your behaviors, creating what they call a cognitive shadow of you. And then it feeds personalized, predictive info back into your brain, subtly shaping your choices, maybe before you even know you're making them. Okay, so our minds are literally extending into our devices. It sounds like science fiction, but it's happening, and it's incredibly powerful. But there's no free lunch, right? There's a cognitive price we pay for all this convenience, and the data is starting to show us exactly what that is.
So let me ask you a question. You'd think that people who are always juggling a million things at once, emails, texts, music, videos, all going at the same time, you'd think they would get really, really good at it, right? That their brains would just adapt and become super efficient multitasking machines.
Well, a huge study from Stanford found the complete opposite. It was kind of shocking, actually. They took heavy media multitaskers and light media multitaskers and gave them tasks. As they added more distractions, the performance of the heavy multitaskers just tanked. The light multitaskers, they were fine. It turns out, constant multitasking doesn't make you better at focusing. It actually makes you worse at tuning out stuff that doesn't matter.
Okay, so multitasking actually trains us to be more distractible. What about another one of these cognitive offloads we do every single day? Using GPS. Does letting our phone navigate for us have any effect on our brain's own internal compass?
Yeah, the research here is pretty clear. The more people relied on GPS over their lives, the worse their own spatial memory got. They literally became less able to form those mental, cognitive maps of their surroundings. And here's the kicker. The study showed it wasn't just that people with a bad sense of direction used GPS more. Nope, it looks like the act of using the GPS was actually causing that cognitive skill to get weaker.
And one last example, reading. How is reading something on a screen different from reading it on paper? Turns out, the differences are huge. A physical book kind of encourages you to get into that deep focus mode. Our devices, on the other hand, are built for distraction, and they push us into a shallow scanning mode instead. And the numbers on this are just staggering. A massive analysis of studies from over 2 decades found that reading in print can boost your comprehension skills by 6 to 8 times more than reading the same thing digitally.
That is a massive difference in our ability to really understand what we're reading.
So what's the common thread here? We've looked at multitasking, navigating, reading, and in every case, we see the same pattern emerge when we let technology do the thinking for us.
The whole thing is driven by a mechanism with a really simple name: cognitive offloading. It's just the act of handing off a mental task to a device. It's super efficient, it's easy, and it's something we are all now doing constantly.
The best analogy, and it's a really simple one, is to think of our cognitive skills as muscles. When you consistently offload the heavy lifting, whether it's navigating a city or remembering a phone number, those mental muscles start to weaken. It's the old principle of use it or lose it, but applied directly to our brains.
So where does this all leave us? Is the takeaway here that technology is making us dumber? Well, it's not quite that simple. The real answer is that we're just living in a completely new cognitive world. I think this quote from the researchers behind that System Zero idea just frames the challenge perfectly. The point isn't to ditch our technology. The point is to be intentional, to be mindful about how we use these amazing tools to make us better without letting them weaken those core human skills like judgment and critical thinking. And that, really, is the fundamental question for every single one of us moving forward. As we continue to merge with these unbelievably smart systems, the most important skill we can have is learning how to manage this new, extended version of ourselves. How do you make sure that you're the one in the driver's seat?